The Texas sun in late autumn baked the dirt roads of Dry Creek into brittle clay. Cattle lowed behind slatted fences, and auctioneers barked over the din of men and livestock. The last stock sale of the season was wrapping up, but one corner of the corral still drew a curious cluster of onlookers. Gideon Trace, 36, stood at the edge of the crowd, his weathered hat shielding eyes that rarely gave anything away. He wasn't one for town visits, and when he did come, it was for tack, feed, or the occasional mare. Today, it was a horse that caught his attention, a bay with flared nostrils and welts striping her flanks. As he stepped closer, his boot scuffed the hard-packed earth. That was when he saw her. She was barely out of girlhood, maybe 19, standing motionless just beyond the pen. Her dress was torn at the hem, feet bare and caked in dust. Hair hung in knots across her cheeks, and her gaze drifted somewhere far off, following things unseen. A man stood beside her, bottle in one hand, rope in the other, the cord looped around her wrist. He swayed as he hollered, deaf and dumb. Don't talk, don't hear. But she cleans good. Don't ask questions. Cheap. Some nearby men chuckled. One spit. Gideon turned away. He didn't come for trouble. But then the girl's eyes landed on him. Steady, unfaltering, not pleading. Just looking, as if she saw something in him others didn't. And in her gaze was a reflection of something too familiar. Loneliness. The drunk lurched toward him. Take the horse. She comes with it. I ain't dragging her back. Gideon hesitated. The mare stomped the ground anxiously, but the girl's gaze never wavered. I'll take 'em both, he said flatly. Laughter erupted behind him. What are you buying, Trace? A wife or work hand? He didn't answer, just counted coins into the drunk's filthy palm. More than the horse was worth. Not near enough for a human soul. When the man yanked the rope, the girl flinched, stepping behind Gideon. He unknotted it, dropped in the dirt. She's yours, the drunk muttered. Good luck. Gideon led the mare from the pen. The girl followed, shawl pulled tight around her shoulders, never speaking, never resisting. When they reached the wagon, she waited for instruction. He lifted a hand to the back. She climbed in, curling into a corner, as if trying to disappear. As he climbed onto the seat, he felt a small tug at his coat. Her hand, rough and small, brushed the fabric gently. She didn't look at him. Her gaze was fixed on the open land. She hadn't said thank you, hadn't pleaded, but that touch was something else. It was trust. The wagon rattled down the fading trail, wheels churning over gravel and dust. Behind them, the town shrank into the horizon. The ranch lay beyond a stretch of prairie, scattered brush, and hills kissed by golden twilight. The place wasn't much. A house with a leaning porch, 2 outbuildings, and a stretch of grazing land. But it was quiet, and it was his. He helped her down from the wagon. She didn't run, just took in the surroundings, eyes moving with silent attention. Inside, he lit a fire and pointed the kettle. She nodded and moved, locating cups and ladle with an instinct that spoke of years tending to others. Still, she said nothing. After supper, Gideon handed her a chalk stub and tapped the doorframe. Name, he asked, voice low. She stared at him for a moment, then knelt. In delicate strokes, she wrote, Leora. He said it aloud. Once. Then again. Leora. She gave no reaction, just rose and slipped into the barn without a word. The next morning, he found her beside the injured mare, soothing the animal with careful hands. No signs, no speech. Just movement, patience, and presence. He watched in quiet amazement. The horse, usually skittish, stood still under her touch. That day he gave her simple tasks. She completed them without sound, without instruction beyond gesture. Each night, she scribbled quiet notes on scrap paper. Hen favoring left leg, or water barrel leaking. There was a calm to it all, a rhythm, until the storm came. It began subtly, a warm wind that stirred the dust at sundown. Gideon noticed a shifting line of clouds, but thought nothing of it. He was checking on calves when Leora appeared in the doorway, barefoot, eyes wide. She gripped his sleeve and tugged hard. What is it? He asked, but she only pointed. She urged him toward the door. He followed. Then the sky cracked. A lightning bolt split the tree behind the shed, which exploded in a fiery blast. Smoke curled into the heavens. The calves scattered. Gideon staggered back. Leora stood unmoving, her face lit by flame, eyes unreadable. She had known. That night, after the fire was out and the animals soothed, he sat across from her at the table. No words, no chalk, just presence. For the first time in years, he didn't feel alone. In the days that followed, he began watching her closer, not with suspicion, but wonder. She spoke through action, through instinct. She couldn't read, didn't write more than a few words, but she saw things. When a cow stood off from the herd, Gideon figured she was just cold. Leora, without a word, readied the birthing stall. By dusk, a calf was born. He never asked how she knew. Then came whispers. At first quiet, then louder. She don't talk, but she stares at things too long. Touch my goat, and it dropped the next week. Gideon said nothing. Neither did she. But he saw how she walked faster through town, how she stopped making eye contact. Then, when a boy on a neighboring farm fell ill, it was Leora who crept in quietly and brewed herbs from his drying wall. The boy lived. But the mother, once grateful, whispered at the well. How did she know? 3 nights later, they came, 8 of them, with torches. Gideon met them at the gate. We want her gone, one said. She's not right. She's deaf, he replied. She ain't deaf to the world. She hears what she shouldn't. They murmured, shifting feet. Inside, Leora stood behind the curtain. She didn't hide. She knew. Gideon stepped forward. You want to drive someone out because you're scared of what you don't understand? Fine, but it won't happen here. Silence stretched. No one moved. Eventually, they left. That night, Leora sat beside her by the fire, then sat beside him. She didn't thank him. She didn't need to. Her hand rested lightly on his. He turned his palm upward and wrapped his fingers around hers. Winter came. Snow fell in soft drifts. Leora stitched a cloak from scraps of old cloth, not for herself, but for him. She didn't need to hear the wind to know the cold would bite. Gideon watched her more often now, her quiet routines, how she trained the yearlings without rope or shout, how she moved like she belonged. He began learning her way, the silent gestures, the glances that spoke volumes. One night, he sat across from her, a slip of paper in hand. He slid it toward her. I want to know your heart, it said. If you'll let me listen with mine. She read it, fingers brushing each word like prayer. Then she looked up and smiled. Not polite, not shy, a true smile, like light breaking over a dark ridge. And in that moment, Gideon Trace knew the silence was not emptiness. It was everything he'd been waiting for. Winter deepened over Dry Creek, covering the land in thick hushes of frost and wind that whistled through bare mesquite branches. Gideon Trace had never paid much attention to seasons before, just worked through them. But now he noticed the way Leora laid pine needles under the coop to keep the hens warm, how she lined the windows with old cloth to keep the cold from creeping in. She moved through the house like wind through wheat, quiet, natural, knowing, and he'd come to depend on her presence more than he'd ever thought possible. Each morning began the same. She brewed coffee just before dawn, letting the scent carry through the small kitchen. He'd wake to it, boots already warm by the hearth where she'd set them. He didn't ask her to. She just did. By now, Gideon had learned more than a dozen signs. Thank you, hungry, danger, ride, stay, and Leora, patient as the sky, taught him more each week. They didn't talk much, but somehow the ranch had never felt more full of conversation. One afternoon, after patching a busted fence, Gideon brought out a wrapped parcel from town, a slate board, and a small book of basic sign language illustrations. He held it out. She hesitated, then took it in both hands. She looked up at him, that rare smile playing at the corners of her mouth. He signed, imperfect but sincere, "Learn together?" Leora nodded, slowly. That night, they sat at the table, drawing signs into the soot-covered slate, her hand guiding his when he faltered. The fire popped softly nearby. Outside, the wind carried the faint howl of a coyote, but inside there was warmth, Then came the letter. Gideon returned from town, jaw tight, a folded page clenched in his gloved hand. He placed it on the table and sat heavily. Leora tilted her head, questioning. He handed it to her. The note was from a relative of her drunk father, a cousin from Houston. The man claimed to have legal concern over Leora's whereabouts and demanded she be returned or compensation sent immediately. Gideon watched as Leora's fingers curled tighter around the page. Her eyes didn't rise. She simply turned and walked to the barn. He followed, keeping distance. Inside, she stood by the injured mare stall, brushing gently in long strokes. Her expression was unreadable. "He doesn't want you," Gideon said finally. "He just wants to own something." Leora didn't move. "You don't have to go. Not if you don't want to." She turned then met his eyes and walked toward him, lifting her hand. She signed slowly. "What if law says I must?" Gideon reached for her fingers. "Then I'll fight the law." She stepped closer, and for a moment, the world narrowed to just a hush of horses and breath and the steady rhythm of a heart learning to beat for two. In the following days, tension lingered like smoke. Gideon rode to the sheriff, brought witnesses, collected papers. Leora wrote a declaration on the slate, naming herself free. A preacher helped write an affidavit. It wasn't airtight, but it was something. Still, the cousin came. A man in fine boots and a hat that had never seen dust. He rode up to the ranch, all show and authority. Leora stood on the porch, arms crossed, unmoving. "You belong to your kin," the cousin declared. "Not this man." Gideon stepped between them. "She belongs to no one." The cousin scoffed. "She's got no papers, no voice. What's to stop me from taking her?" Leora walked forward then, pulled the slate from her apron. She'd written 4 words. "I choose to stay." The cousin's lip curled, but Gideon's hand felt the grip of the rifle leaning by the porch beam. "Ride on." The man left in a cloud of dust and bruised ego. Leora watched until he disappeared over the ridge. That night, they sat close beside the fire. She had started embroidering scraps, little wildflowers onto cloth. Gideon watched her, then reached for the slate. He wrote, "You don't have to speak to be heard." Leora reached out, traced those words with her fingers, then rested her hand gently against his chest. No more running, no more fear. Winter would pass, but this feeling, this quiet, steadfast connection, was something meant to last. In the stillness, they understood what most people never could. That love, real love, needs no permission and no sound. It only needs to be chosen. And they had. Spring crept in slowly across Dry Creek, like a song hummed under the breath. The frost gave way to mud. The creek swelled with meltwater, and little green shoots began to push their way up through the thawed earth. On the Trace Ranch, change was in the air, not just in the season, but in the silence that no longer felt like emptiness. Leora had planted a small garden by the side of the house. Her own idea: beans, carrots, mint, and sunflowers. Each morning, she knelt in the soft dirt, hands buried in earth as she worked. Gideon sometimes watched from the porch, a coffee cup in hand, wondering how someone so silent could fill a place so completely. He'd started building a new room on the side of the house. It was meant to be hers, not because she asked, but because she deserved it, a space with a door of her own, windows facing sunrise. She'd help with the frame, handed him nails and wood without being asked. When she smiled, it was never out of obligation, only when she meant it. One night, after supper, she brought out a small wooden box. She opened it carefully and showed him what was inside, a bundle of old letters, bound in a worn ribbon. She handed him one. It was from her mother, written years ago, before she stopped hearing. He read slowly, the candlelight flickering against the page. The words were simple: encouragement, prayers, love. Her mother had died not long after the letters ended. He looked up, but Leora was already watching him. "She taught me to read lips," she signed slowly, "before she passed." He nodded, swallowing a lump in his throat. Then came word of trouble in the hills. A pair of cattle had gone missing from a neighboring ranch. Wolves, maybe, or rustlers. Gideon rode out to check fences while Leora stayed behind, tending the barn. By late afternoon, the sky had turned strange, not stormy, but heavy, a stillness in the air that set nerves on edge. When Gideon returned, the front gate was swinging wide, and Leora was gone. He called out instinctively, forgetting she couldn't hear, then cursed himself and dismounted. The barn was empty. Her shawl was missing. The fire in the hearth had gone out. He found the first tracks near the fence line. Wagon wheels, not town wagons. The kind used by traders who pass through once a season. Not always honest. Not always kind. Fear rooted in his gut. He rode hard for an hour, following the faint trail until it veered toward the river bend. That's where he found them. 2 men, 1 wagon, and Leora sitting stiff on the bench seat, hands in her lap, eyes blank. Gideon rode in fast, gun holster but his voice sharp. "She with you?" One man spat. She was outside the gate. Said nothing. We figured she was lost. Gideon dismounted, walked straight to her. "Leora," he said quietly. She turned to him then, slowly, no tears, no fear, just exhaustion. He reached for her hand. "Come home." She nodded, slid off the wagon without a sound. The men muttered something about women and witchcraft, but Gideon didn't look back. On the ride home, she held his arm with both hands, just enough to let him know she'd felt the fear. 2. Back at the ranch, he made tea while she curled under a blanket. He didn't press her, didn't ask what had happened. But that night, when he handed her the slate to write something, she didn't take it. Instead, she reached for his hand and spelled slowly into his palm. "Don't let go again." He closed his fingers around hers. "Never." A few weeks later, they went to town together for the first time. Heads turned, whispers floated, but Gideon kept close, her hand tucked in the crook of his arm. He introduced her to the storekeeper as "my partner," and when the man blinked, Gideon added, "She hears with her heart, better than most of us ever do." That night, she sat by the fire, tracing words onto paper. When she showed it to him, it read, "What we build is stronger than what they fear." And he believed her, because love like this, silent, rooted, resilient, wasn't made for easy days. It was built for storms, for misunderstandings, for every hand that tried to pull it apart. Spring warmed, the garden bloomed, and Gideon Trace, once a man of few words, learned that some bonds need no speaking at all, only the will to stay.